Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We had over 240 people register for this webinar, which is a fantastic turnout, and we're so excited to share some information with y'all. Today's webinar is a food service consultant's guide to serving more local food at institutions. This training is designed specifically for food service consultants, but it's also applicable to other value chain facilitators. This webinar is being recorded for later viewing, and I'll send out a link to that after the fact. So there are a couple of opportunities for you all as participants to interact with each other and with the panelists throughout the webinar today. One is the Zoom group chat, which you can find in your black Zoom toolbar. You can go ahead and send messages to the whole group or to just the panelists. You're also welcome to put in your questions into the Q&A box throughout the webinar, but especially at the end, and we'll do our best to answer those questions throughout. If there isn't time to answer your question on the webinar, we'll follow up with you afterward. So I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Part one will be led by John Tureen, who's the president of Sustainable Food Systems, LLC, and Peter Allison, who works with me as our network director at Farm to Institution New England. I'm going to pass it over to Peter now.
Thank you, Caitlin. That was Caitlin Haskins, Fine's communication coordinator. And welcome to everyone. I'd just like to take a minute to provide a brief overview of our agenda today. So we'll start with an introduction to Fine and why we've chosen to focus on the somewhat arcane topic of institutional food service management RFPs and contracts. And then next, John Tureen will provide guidance on navigating the food service management toolkit that we've produced, where to find it, what it entails, and how to make the best use of it. And then we'll get to our main course, the case study from UVM, featuring 3 perspectives on the process and results of the food service management RFP and ensuing contract with Sodexo. And then finally, as Caitlin mentioned, we'll create space for you to ask questions of the panelists. Next slide, please. So our primary target audience today is the community of food service consultants who work with institutions. We want to help you to better respond to the growing demand from institutions to incorporate local and sustainable food values into their dining operations, and to do so in a way that's most efficient and effective for all. And equally important and relevant are the other stakeholders working to advise and advocate for change in the institutional food system. We want you to better understand the intricacies of the food service management contracts and operations so that you're more effective and informed when sitting down at the table. Next slide. So just a little bit about Fine. We're a 6-state collaboration. It's working to mobilize the power of New England institutions to transform our food system. We care about supporting local farmers and fishers, getting good food to consumers, and creating good jobs and businesses along the way. And we do that by building relationships, conducting research, sharing information, and helping to advance strategies that address critical barriers in the farm to institution supply chain. And next slide. And one of those strategies that we've focused on is related to breaking down the mysteries in the food service management contracting process. Over the past several years, we've worked with a team of advisors who've conducted research and developed a number of papers, done some webinars, and created tools to make this system more transparent. And one of those is the Local Food Toolkit. Next, John Tureen, who's the president of Sustainable Food Systems and has been one of the advisors who's played a lead role in this project, and also really played the key role in organizing the webinar presentations today, is going to talk a little bit about the toolkit. So thank you, John, for your assistance with the project and the webinar to date. And let me hand it over to you to say a word about the toolkit and then introduce our panelists. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Peter. And thanks everybody for tuning in here this beautiful day. As a food service consultant who works with and advocates for better food at institutions, I've got a passionate interest in this escalating farm to school or farm to college, farm to healthcare initiative that we hear so much about. And as Peter mentioned, this diverse group of stakeholders had got together over pretty much for over a year. We worked and we researched and interviewed and to craft this particular toolkit. To our knowledge, never before had anyone summarized the idiosyncrasies of contract management, RFP processes, in order to maximize the whole local sustainable food initiative. It's a cutting edge document for sure. So where would you find this toolkit? So on the FIND webpage, you would go to, which is farmtoinstitution.org. Under the tools menu with the arrows pointing, there's another menu for guides, and you would click there and voila, you would get to this toolkit. So let me talk a little bit about this starting on the next slide. So I'm going to take but a moment to talk as what I think are the key highlights, the high points, but by all means, when you go in, check out the whole body of knowledge that's in there. There's a lot, and there's a lot that you may find very helpful. I mean, first off, the sections 1 through 5 cover an overview of all things institutional or non-commercial, sometimes as it's called, food service. This is a great place to direct folks who may not have firsthand experience in operations or may want a refresher course in things like purchasing basics, personnel makeup by business sector. And what I mean by business sector is college, K-12, healthcare, et cetera. As well as some research findings of trends and comparisons from the various facilities that we worked with in the study. Section 6 focuses on the actual recommendations for RFPs and contract processes. In there, you'll find it provides definitions for local, which is often a moving target, and other value-based attributes in the procurement policy process. It also, in Section 6, is where where we highly recommend these institutions hire a consultant to help facilitate this process. In other words, we're suggesting they don't go about this alone. Let's get some expertise help. This Section 6 also covers examples and suggestions for setting quantitative purchasing commitments, for instance, like percentage of local, et cetera. It also shows how to use an RFP to secure supply chain transparency and accountability, which all over the years I often hear is a huge issue to try to follow. Section 7 details RFP development, whether it's assembling a team, step-by-step development questions to ask the team, goal prioritization, et cetera. This section breaks down the how-tos of creating effective RFPs. And then at the risk of redundancy, I'm going to let the folks in the second part of this webinar talk about how they did it. Section 8 breaks down the types, components, negotiation tactics, implementation of food service management company contracts. And those are the overall key points. But as I mentioned, when you get into this toolkit, there's a lot of great stuff in there. And the great part about it is it's right there on the website. So you can go through there. Next slide, please. If you want a deeper dive into procurement information and institutional examples, we also have a webinar you can pull up called Setting the Table for Success, Increasing Local Food Purchasing at Institutions. In here, you'll find this and a whole lot more of resources in that same tools menu that's on the FIND website. So now let's move on to something really interesting. We go to the next, the case study. So, as we researched examples of recent RFP processes, one clearly exemplified the standards we could all benefit from. The University of Vermont story is one of true partnership that bonded to overcome and overhaul traditional challenges faced in the outsourcing process in order to create a whole new opportunities. And I liked how Peter teed up this at the beginning of this talk, where he said this, the main course of this webinar. So if we could move on to the next one. So here's the AllStar team that's going to share their story today. We've got Dennis DePaul, who's the Associate Dean for Student Affairs at the University of Vermont. In other words, he'd be the client. Melissa Zelazny, Resident DM for Sodexo at UVM, or Food Service Management Company. And Claudia Scotti, who Executive Principal at Envision Strategies, aka the consultant, whose job it was she had to manage this whole cutting edge initiative. So I'm going to pass it on to Dennis to take it from here, and we'll circle back with lots of feedback and questions. Dennis.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you for having me here as part of this webinar. We at the University of Vermont, we've taken a lot of pride in what we've done over the course of the last couple of years. Just briefly, for me, I started at the university in this role at the beginning of a 10-year contract. And I spent that first 10 years of my time here at the university living and breathing someone else's contract. So when it came time to RFP and renew the contract, we as an institution were really ready, and I myself was ready for something new and different from what we had done before. A brief overview of UVM Dining, the program we have here. We have about 9,800 undergraduate students with 5,500 living on campus. We also have an additional up to, at any given day, 3,000 to 5,000 faculty and staff members who are on our campus, and many of them eating on and within our venues. We are adjacent to the largest hospital in the state of Vermont, who also eats at most of our venues. So we serve well beyond just our campus through our dining program. We serve an average of about 10,000 meals per day on this campus through a variety of many different facilities. So we have 4 different residential or all-you-care-to-eat dining halls on our campus. For a campus our size, it's a lot. We do have a lot of facilities on our campus. We also have 9 retail locations and 3 locally subcontracted retail spaces, which were part of this contract, is bringing the local fare from the community onto our campus, so our students wouldn't be leaving our campus, but they would be eating here. We also have concessions and catering and conferences and coffee shops and what we would call convenience shopping across campus as well. So in total, there are about 19 or 20 different places where food is happening on our very small campus, which is a pretty unusual scope for a campus of our size. So I think if we can move on to the next slide, we'll talk about our actual RFP process. When we entered into a discussion around our RFP and how we wanted to do that, the very first step for us was to start early. That was the most important piece. So as you can probably guess, it wasn't a matter of starting 6 months early. We started 1.5 years before, and we very carefully developed a committee that would do this work with us. So it would not just be the Division of Student Affairs taking a look at this, but we actually sought out many different partnerships across campus in order to help us make this very important decision for our community. We brought in students, we brought in faculty, we brought in academic units very meaningfully that were connected to the food systems academic program here on campus, and made them part of our committee and asked them to commit for a full 1.5 years to do that. We were very thoughtful about that process. And I can't speak enough to how we went about that process, because these are the people who would be making for us at the time, a potentially 10-year decision on how students would be eating on our campus. So we felt it made a lot of sense to think carefully about who we put into that group. Once the committee was established and appointed by the president, we did ask our president to appoint that group to kind of further push the importance of serving in this particular committee. We engaged the community. We spent a lot of time as a committee developing the hows and whats and ways that we wanted to engage the community. That included multiple levels of surveying across campus, from our students to our faculty and staff. We also conducted a series, I'm not even sure I could accurately reflect how many personal interviews took place across campus with various groups and various individuals, trying to get all of the different vantage points and viewpoints into our dining program that were necessary for that conversation. So we're talking about everything from talking to people who work on the university farm, to talking to people who work in the University Maple Research Center, to faculty members in our College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, to folks in our access office for students with disabilities and having various pretty serious eating needs for our students on our campus, to our Student Government Association, to our Student Graduate Association. We just really thoughtfully engaged a lot of different people on campus. In addition to that, we decided to engage people off campus and talked to local distributors and talked to local farms and different community members that were connected to the food system for the institution about how and what they would want to see. In order for us to balance our thought process and what we wanted for a campus, we needed to think beyond our campus, and we did that. And we thought very carefully about how these things took place, which even included a visit to Google's campus and Microsoft's campus to look at their food system and how they are making connections in the local communities to bring food to their campuses. And we used that information as part of this process as well. From there, we really spent an inordinate amount of time developing our institutional values. We were really looking to do an RFP that was different, that didn't fit the norm as what was out there. And we didn't go into this process looking for a big chunk of money or for some big capital project or for a specific program on our campus. We decided to start with, what are UVM's values? And how do those values align with the food service program that we are offering to our campus? So we spent a lot of time going through the data we had collected to really get to our core objectives and our core values. And that is how we wrote our RFP. The RFP truly reflected our campus's values and how we feel and want to operate in the food system and what that looks like. And for our academic partners in this conversation, there was wholehearted applause to that process of connecting how our students eat on our campus with what they're learning in their classrooms. From there, once the RFP was launched, I will freely admit there was a period of time of the potential bidders really kind of looking at us going, huh? What is this? Or they were really having a moment of not understanding what we were trying to do at UVM because it was so out of the norm of what typical RFPs look like. The number of times I answered the question, really, money is not the #1 thing you're looking for? I got that question a lot, and I had to say, no, our values are what we're looking to meet. And that was a very different conversation for potential bidders on this contract, and quite confusing, honestly, for a lot of the bidders on this contract. So very thoughtful conversations with the bidders about what this meant and how we wanted to operate and what we wanted that to look like. From there, we developed weights and measures that matched our values, and how we, once the RFP bidders had submitted their bids, we went through a deeply impressive evaluation process, really looking at what was proposed and how it matched to what we asked and how that all fit into our values. And the highest weighted measures in that process were the values, without a doubt. It wasn't the financial commitment. It wasn't these other things. It was, how well does this vendor or potential vendor partner bring our values or meet our values, and in some cases exceed them, which is really what we asked them to do. We said, we want you to meet these values, and if you can, go beyond them and be a forward thinker with us. We wanted a vendor partner that was really looking at today and beyond today. From there, through our selection process, we landed with the incumbent bidder for our campus, Sodexo, who has been with the university for a very long time, 50+ years, really put forward a proposal that very strongly met and exceeded some of our expectations. And not all the bidders to our contract were able to do that, or no matter how many conversations we had, they didn't seem to fully comprehend what we were actually looking for. But we did land with Sodexo because they met or went beyond what we were looking to do, from the local to the sustainable to the operations to the wellness focus. They really were able to meet us. And since being on our campus now, or continuing on our campus for the last 2 years, we really have looked at how to continue to enhance what we're doing and to be innovative what we're doing both in our dining halls, in our retail establishments, and our connections to our academic work. We have a dining implementation team that basically runs our dining program or oversees our dining program, as well as academic class involvement with our program, where we have classes on our campus that are evaluating and thoughtfully assessing our program and providing feedback to that group. So that academic connection is not lost, and that helps to keep us very innovative and on the cutting edge of the work. That academic connection was very, very important for us. So those were our big pieces: that thoughtful committee selection, the community engagement, both on campus and off campus and beyond, really looking at launching an RFP that was different, and then continuing that innovation once we are actually live with the program, which we have been now for 1.5 years, and it's going very well. So that is my portion. I believe coming up next at this point is the food management company. So I'm actually going to hand it over to a pretty amazing woman, Melissa Zelazny, who is part of my team here at the university. And I failed to mention that that's an important part of this. One of the things that we asked for was for that the management team of our vendor partner would become part of our division in a very meaningful way, part of my leadership team. And I'm happy to turn it over to Melissa, who has partnered with us in an outstanding way. So Melissa, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you for the kind comments. I've been the resident district manager here at the University of Vermont with Sodexo for the past 11 years. Like Dennis, I came in on the brink of a new contract cycle and was successful in retaining UVM as our client. So we're excited to be on this journey with them. And my portion is to really talk about it, the challenges in responding to the RFP as both the incumbent and in general as a food service contractor. The RFP was certainly daunting for us as well. There was very little advantage in terms of the incumbency. The RFP wanted everything that they currently had and then a vision for the future. So I think it was a fairly level playing field moving forward, and it really challenged us to make sure that we were having addressing the vision for the dining program, not relying on that incumbency, and really thinking outside the box as to how we would perform and respond moving forward. One of the things that we had to do was go through our own visioning exercise. Again, it's hard as a food service company to come to the table with, you sort of have a traditional way of approaching RFPs and really making that team understand the values of what UVM wanted and to listen to what the on-site team is really stating about those values. So I think that was a challenge and something that we were successful in being able to do. really a forward-thinking RFP. So we were really taking this document and saying, okay, we're addressing many of these things that they like and what we're doing, but really how can you differentiate and move forward in an innovative way, engaging the community, and really understanding what that end game is for the client partner. UVM was very specific about read the RFP, answer everything to do with the RFP. And Dennis reiterated that a lot to individuals, and it's hard leading into the sort of the balancing the values with the financial outcomes that you expect, because at the end of the day, is it true? Are you really is your interest in not financial? So there was a lot of discussion about capital infusion. What was too much? What was too little? What did they need? And a lot of discussion about is it at the end of the day, is it the lowest bidder? Will get the job. So so it was a very challenging for us and for, I would imagine, the other bidders to say, how do you balance that to make sure you have a responsible proposal encompassing all of those values and all of those ideas, and making sure that it's it's a responsible plan. The metrics that they put into the proposal were challenging, and having to address very specifically a strategic plan that would really lay out how we were going to meet those thresholds for local foods and for academic engagement, and from a lot of detail regarding that. So that was also one of the challenging pieces for that. Probably one of the most critical issues within the contract was the role of transparency in terms of purchasing agreements, and also related to data sharing. We were already part of the Real Food Campus Commitment, and Sodexo already had a sort of an open sharing comment or document for sharing with students data. But that's a very challenging and requires a lot of trust in terms of making sure that you have to share data in order to change systems, and we had to share data in order to function in the state community as well. A lot of the institution and the state are moving with forward with tracking local foods, and the farm to institution challenge of moving that number. So we took a very forward approach in terms of being transparent. We had to get buy-off from the highest levels within Sodexo. I mean, it is a vendor relationships and vendor discount sharing is a reality in institutional purchasing. It's part of our value that we bring to organizations is our purchasing power. So in one aspect, it's almost in opposition with some of that food system thinking, but at UVM, it was more about, hey, we want to be transparent. We want to know, what is the amount? How does it impact the food program? How can we address the vendor rebates and the process in which you guys hold yourselves accountable to those agreements? So it was more about shifting focus from having our team has not really been motivated by vendor compliance and focusing on prime distribution as much based on the local food community, but it is a vital part of making our financial statement at UVM a reality. So it's there, it's spoken about, and those financial goals are looked at, but they're not used as a motivating factor in terms of providing any barrier to us accessing more local food, I would say. So we're very upfront and transparent about that. And addressing the local food purchasing requirements, there was some pretty strict metrics in terms of what their goals were in terms of real food, and both for the state of Vermont. I think UVM as a public institution within the state, and one of the largest food buyers in the state, really wanted to make sure that we are setting those goals and exceeding the goals of the state to help our local community as well with the food systems movement that is happening. So establishing those stakeholders, Sodexo, we brought resources to bear. Both we have an on-site sustainability manager and also have a state representative in our Vermont First initiative to look at data. Again, you can't make change responsibly without understanding what that data is and how those changes will impact, all of the various constituents, stakeholders, and also using the Real Food Committee and the Vermont Farm to Plate Committee and looking at and addressing challenges and barriers to that food system. So I think data has certainly been something that we have shared and have worked on, and has taken a lot of resources put to it in order to get where we are today, and having a really good plan, and are exceeding that plan, and making sure that the process in which we're engaging those stakeholders is very transparent. So I think that in closing, some of the challenges I think that people have is some of the times it is the resources to be able to track data and to have that amount of information in order to make that decision-making process. And I think with the UVM RFP, it's more about the process of how we're maintaining that innovation and engaging the community at UVM to keep the innovation going. And like Dennis mentioned, the implementation teams, our reporting, and all of those pieces come together with our academic partnerships as well to really just have a rich data sharing initiative to make the changes that we need. And with that comes, the balancing of the finances. I think, we have a shared financial goals with the university, so it all has to work. And I think one of the biggest challenges with this RFP was there was so much in it that and our client will say today, he's like, hey, you knew what you were getting in for. You better make sure that the financials are responsible for what you want to do and how you vision this RFP taking place. So I think that was a challenge for us because you're always trying to balance that. But in the end, it was the best offer that really related to what they needed as an institution, and in a responsible fashion to make sure that you can achieve those goals. You don't want to set yourself up for your failure. When there's such an aggressive vision and expectations out there. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Claudia, who is the food service consultant with us.
Thanks, Melissa. That was really great. Thank you for being so honest and forthright about the challenges that you faced in responding to this RFP. And from a consultant perspective, of course, my role in all of this was to, working with Dennis to manage this process and to develop all of the synthesize all the diverse needs of the campus, and to develop an RFP that reflected those needs and aspirations, and to help and to manage that process of going out to bid and analyzing proposals received and going through shortlist interviews and selection process. So, from that standpoint, it was a typical RFP process, but on a whole nother level, it was incredibly different process because everything we were doing was really breaking new ground. Not only for the university, which has always had a very strong focus in sustainability and local sourcing and how that relates to their academic mission, and in this case wanting to really take that to the next level in a really significant way. And then also breaking new ground with the suppliers because to my knowledge at least, we asked all of our bidders to do something way beyond what they have traditionally done and to think about things in a completely different way. And, you know, every step of this process, we were constantly having to evaluate our aspirations and check that against reality of what we thought might be possible, and to kind of align, you know, all the aspirations and values with reality. So, you know, that was very challenging and very different. The other piece that Melissa's talked about, that it was, in my opinion, quite intimidating for the suppliers, was the transparency issue, because, you know, we're asking them to open up their closet and show us what's in there. And, you know, that's very different than traditionally the way the contract food service industry has worked. And, you know, that was a big ask. So, you know, there were many things that were different about this RFP, both from the university perspective, from the supplier perspective, and for me, from the consultant perspective. And, you know, for those of you who are consultants on this webinar, you know, one of the challenges was really, you go into a process thinking that you know what it's going to be like and how it's going to unfold. And in this case, it unfolded very differently than, you know, I would say the typical RFP, in terms of the level of engagement, the level of commitment, the level of research that the university did with its own constituents and with the community was really unprecedented in my experience, and it was really wonderful. But what came back was a boatload of information and aspirations and desires that we as a committee had to work through and boil down to, you know, sort of the key asks for this RFP. So that was quite challenging. And really, I think for all of us who were involved, it became less about the business of what we were doing and more really doing it for the love of what we were doing. So that's, you know, in many ways quite different from the typical RFP process. Relative to the challenges that we faced, you know, from a consultant view, one of the key ones was balancing all the different needs of the university, because while Dennis is absolutely correct in saying that the most important thing was that the program would reflect the university's values, there were some other very real things that we needed to get out of this RFP. You know, we had asks around changing the program offerings, and this is a large campus dining program. We had asks around changing service delivery, injecting technology into the program, bringing more local partners in that are operating partners. So we had a lot of asks around that. And while capital investment was not the primary focus of the RFP, we did have a Capital Investment Act ask, because you can't change the program and bring in new vendors without, you know, having some capital investment to make that happen. So all of these things were critically important as well. And, you know, all of this was coming under the overlay of, you know, this really intense focus on trying to move the program forward from a local and sustainable standpoint. So all of that together was quite challenging to boil it down to sort of the nexus of what we wanted and what we thought was realistic, and establishing the priorities around all those asks, finding the right balance. It took a lot of research, it took a lot of conversation, it took a lot of analysis to get there. The second challenge was really then, after we had gotten our act together and understood clearly as a team what we were aiming at, it was communicating that to the food management companies. Because, you know, as you all know, communication, once a formal RFP process starts, communication becomes primarily written. So, so it's articulating the university's aspirations and priorities in writing, we found, I think, to be quite challenging, because you know, it can be a very dry document. The passion around priorities doesn't necessarily come through easily in a written document, and it's really challenging, I think, for suppliers. You know, they read this laundry list of things that the university is asking for, and it's hard for them to look at a written document and really get the real true idea of the intent relative to what's most important, what's very important, what's less important but desirable. You know, in other words, to figure out how to align their own proposal with what the university is asking for. It's really difficult to articulate that clearly in writing. I think we did a good job of it at the end of the day, but it took a lot of work, and you know, followed by a lot of structured communication, verbal communication with the suppliers, you know, which is very important, of course, about how you communicate when you're within the framework of that process because of all the level playing field issues, you know. So, you know, all of the food service suppliers have varying levels of commitment to local sustainable. They're all used to putting things in written documents, written proposals around what they can do. What we were asking for was something far beyond what they typically have done and were organized to do. So getting all the suppliers' attention on that issue was a really big focus of the verbal communication that happened post-release of the RFP. And then I guess the third one that really comes to mind, and of course I could talk about the challenges of this RFP for the rest of the hour, but we want to leave some time for Q&A. There were a lot of challenges around maintaining a level playing field, which, you know, the university was very intent on, as was I. And the challenges were really mostly around the local sourcing ask because, you know, for the companies that were not very active in Burlington, Vermont, trying to establish those relationships, understand what was possible in terms of, you know, what local farmers were out there, what could they supply, what was the potential for a relationship. That was a really challenging thing for the non-incumbent suppliers to do in the time frame that they had relative to responding with their proposals. So, you know, it took them quite a while, I think, to get their head around this, how serious we were about this and how important it was going to be about the selection. It also took them a lot of time to figure out what was possible. And if I was going to do one thing differently in terms of a lesson learned, I think it would have been good if we had given them more time to respond with their proposal, because they had to do a lot of things that they were not used to doing and reach out and find people that they didn't already know who could be their partners. And, you know, it was a really challenging RFP from that standpoint. So I think that, you know, that was a tough thing. And then, you know, for Sodexo, it was a complete sort of take it to the next level ask, and Melissa's already talked about that. We had, you know, we invited several firms to participate. We had 4 firms that attended the pre-proposal conference. Of those, 2 put in a full proposal, 1 put in a partial proposal, and 1 firm that's quite a large national firm declined to bid because they did not feel they could be successful. So this was not an easy process, and it was intimidating, I think, to all of the suppliers in terms of the ask, but also in terms of the level of transparency that was required, and just the level of commitment that it was going to take to deliver on the local sustainable asks that were embedded in the RFP. So I will turn it over to John or Caitlin to take questions, and we'll see what we can answer here.
Hey, great, thank you all. You know, like I said, we have the pros, the professional all-star team here on our webinar. Provided a ton of information, and I see a few questions have come in. Before we get to the questions, just in very briefly, I would ask individually, or any one of you that wants to answer, or all of you, in reflecting on this now, what has been a year and a half later, what would you, how has it honestly gone, and what would you do differently now that you've gone through it?
So this is Dennis. From my perspective as the institution, oftentimes you'll do an RFP and promises are made and not delivered upon, and I would say that is anything but the truth in this case. I think the promises that were made through our RFP bidding process and interview process to actual implementation over the course of the last year and a half have definitely happened, and then some, in partnership with us. We truly see ourselves in partnership with our partner vendor. It is not it's not anything other than that. So from my perspective, very briefly, I think it's gone very well and has met or exceeded expectations.
Fantastic. Sounds that way. Would any of you say, in retrospect, you'd do something different to recommend to any of the listeners?
I think I would agree with Claudia. We had many different challenges through our process, like any RFP process, and because of some of those challenges, it gets difficult. In the last minutes before we launched the RFP, there was a decision by our president to do a very thorough evaluation of a self-op choice. And so that set us back about 3 months doing that very detailed evaluation, which resulted in choosing to not do a self-op after that. So as a result of that, the return time for the RFP got a lot shorter. So once we launched the RFP, getting answers back from our vendors, I'm trying to remember how much time, but it wasn't a lot. Claudia, I don't know if you remember, but it was only a matter of a few weeks that they had to respond. And I would definitely change that because of how different our RFP was. We should have provided ample time for the appropriate digging and answers.
Yeah, and they had about 6 weeks to respond, which is, it's fairly generous for a typical RFP, but it was not generous for this one.
God, that must have been fun to manage, Claudia. I have my sympathy, but it's a great example of how progressive the institution is. I'm going to ask us because there's a few great questions in here, and I'm going to defer to Caitlin to perhaps ask those so we can get to them. Caitlin, could you do that?
Absolutely. Thanks, John. So the first question came in a while ago. An anonymous viewer asks, what are some examples of how Sodexo went beyond the core values of the university as part of the bidding process? So any of you are welcome to answer.
Yeah, I mean, a few things this is Dennis again, a few things come to mind in that for me, and that is, we are part of the Real Food Challenge on our campus, and of course expected any bidder to agree to participate in the Real Food Challenge and to meet the goals of 20% by 2020. In the proposal, Sodexo offered to go beyond 20% by 2020. I believe in their proposal it was up to 23% by 2020. So that's one example. Sodexo also has a state contract with Vermont to specifically buy local, which is very different from any other vendor bid. That wasn't necessarily for our campus, but it was a step they made and a commitment they made to the state of Vermont in order to continue to do business here. To the academic connections, it's part of this RFP where we were building a new dining hall that is scheduled to be open this coming summer. And that dining hall will be the largest dining hall on our campus. And not only did they help us envision that dining hall as part of the RFP, but they actually envisioned an academic connection to that dining hall, which went beyond what we were asking for. We told them to think broadly, but that sustainability center or academic classroom that is now going to be part of our dining hall went beyond even what I was thinking, which was really refreshing and innovative, and we were really excited about that.
Great, thank you, Dennis. So the next question is from Ray Susie. They say, aside from the transparency asks delivered, can you offer a few examples of what services the university offered the students that went, quote, way beyond a traditional farm to fork program as a result of this RFP? Any thoughts?
Yeah, this is Melissa. I would say some of the subcontractor relationships we developed. I mean, we brought Skinny Pancake, which is a local restaurant on campus that the students really had input into. We brought that onto campus, which and took over one of our venues that we renovated for them. So that was a huge statement, I think, in terms of bringing more local partners that are also advancing the mission of local food on campus. And we have an academic class that partners with tracking those subcontractors, so they're part of the food system conversation. So we don't use them as part of our metrics, but they're used overall for the university's metrics in looking at that. So I think that was a huge win for students, and was certainly a complex renovation project for us to add on to the institution. I think part of our the metrics in terms of local food. I mean, in each of our venues, highlighting our Vermont First initiatives. We've brought more local products to campus, really featuring community partnerships with UVM. So we've really extended UVM as an agricultural school. We now have 100% Procter Vermont maple syrup. We have a Catamount farm that is, we're purchasing the majority of our vegetables from, or majority of their vegetables to the institution. Interrail Food Hub, we've assigned a deal with them. So I think it's been more about strengthening those partnerships within the university, and sort of just the timing. We used to buy our milk from UVM, and now we're in conversations about a value-added milk, ice cream potentially, or product for UVM specific. So, and all of them are related to classes or school clubs or academics. So it's not about us generally, coming up with these ideas, but it's about helping to capitalize on what is happening on campus. So.
Okay,
Melissa, this is Claudia. You might also want to talk a little bit about the plans for the new dining hall relative to connecting education to the student experience, because I think that is going to be quite different than what is typical level of educational opportunity in higher ed dining.
Yeah, I think one of the whole student engagement with food is becoming, with the teaching kitchen, and we introduced a My Kitchen, we call it, at one of our dining locations, which students are, using induction burners and learning to cook, and having a chef there with them. In the new dining hall, this will be much larger. It will be a separate space. It will have community activities, and we also have an additional station that will just really be prioritizing innovation and what's happening with the food community. And each of those stations, it will be a very farm to table experience in that dining hall. So just amping up the learning opportunities for students, and making the connection to food, and having that opportunity in that particular location will be great.
Thank you, Melissa. So we have quite a few questions and only 6 minutes to go. We're going to try to get through as many as possible. Someone asks, do the local farms that sell into the UVM Sodexo system sell directly to Sodexo, or do they have to go through a regional or national broadliner such as Cisco or others?
We primarily use regional vendors. for the purposes of just congregating a lot of food through distribution. And we have access, so we use Intervale Food Hub as an aggregator. We use Black River Produce as a regional distributor. We use Cisco for some things, and we do have direct partnerships with a few of our local vendors, but we prefer to go through the distributor, and that is sort of how we balance that, those vendor partnerships while looking at data in a very different way. All of our vendors provide data, and so our distributors provide data to us on local food purchasing and through our vendors. So it is sort of part of our process to aggregate all of that into one easily accessible way of getting the information we need.
And from a practical matter, from the institution side, we have really busy docks now. And so to have countless trucks coming in and out of our docks to make deliveries was just not realistic for our campus. So, having a regional or a local distributor centralize that for us was important.
Thanks, you two. Next question is from Julia Van Loon. They say, why did you elect to not go self-op?
There was not an appetite to bring on board several hundred new employees at the institutional level, as well as the costs and the finances behind doing that. The net basically wasn't that different from self-op versus a vendor partner of some kind. So we made the decision to stay in a vendor partner model.
Got it. Okay. Anonymous viewer says, does Sodexo use a local food aggregator, such as a food hub, to source food and assist with food safety management for small farms? I think you already mentioned Intervale. Do you work with any others?
We use the Black River Produce as our regional distributor. Intervale Food Hub. We do purchase food from the Hardwick Food Venture Center as for some of the specialty things that they've done for us. But the Food Hub, as you are looking at it, is really the Intervale. So.
Great. Okay. Morgan Householder wonders, what marketing avenues were used on campus to encourage eating the local food?
It's kind of a funny question because it's not even necessary to market it. It sort of happens on its own, being that we're in Vermont. Melissa, I don't know if you feel differently, but certainly for our campus, eating local is in the water here, and our students pretty immediately pick that up from orientation on. So we have some pretty minimal marketing things, but the lines are out the doors at our local vendors on campus without any marketing.
I mean, I think one of the tools that we've been using is Real Food Working Group. They have a sort of a marketing arm, and we stamp foods that meet the Real Food criteria. We also have Vermont First marketing and farm, infographics and blog posts, and certainly through our sustainability manager, social media. We do a lot of marketing, and we have a local restaurant, Brennan's, on campus that features a lot of the farms that we use across campus. So it is important to continue to tell the story, which we do with each of our locations. So.
Great. Okay, thank you both. John Stoddard wonders, would Sodexo consider expanding this to other regions and sectors? Perhaps consider developing a regional bid process for their accounts with suppliers that would be able to source accounts from across the region?
Well, we've kind of adopted this a little bit with our Vermont First coordinator position. This really kind of looks at the state with a lot of our accounts, and I think part of that process was used in the main process with looking at large systems, more of a regional and a statewide focus. So I think it's a model, but each client is different, so you just have to have everybody that's on the same page. So I'm not sure it would be replicable, depending on which schools are affiliated. So.
Okay, you guys, so we're going to take a quick break to go through our remaining slides, and then we'll come back. And if anyone is interested in staying on until 2:10, we can continue asking questions and getting some answers. So first off, I'm going to pass it over to Peter real quick.
Hi, thanks everyone. This has been fantastic. Appreciate the questions and presentations. I'll be real brief, just to let you know that at our Firmed Institution Summit on April 6th and 7th in Leominster, Mass, we'll be having a couple of very deep dive sessions on these topics led by Jen Abadi and other colleagues from Healthcare Without Harm. More information on our website there. And for those looking to earn continuing ed credits, you can complete this survey, particularly for those of you who are in the consulting community, and others who are interested in getting credits can complete that survey as well, and we'll follow up with you. I'll stop there. Here's the ways to get in touch with us, to find the toolkit, and to connect with us. And if you want to continue to get updates, you can get our newsletter, which is called The Fine Print, available, which you can find through a link on our main website, firmedinstitution.org.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Peter. So that's the official close of the webinar, but if you're interested in staying on to hear the answers to these remaining questions, we have 6 questions left. You're welcome to do so, and this recording will be available later. I'll send it to everyone who registered for the webinar. So back to questions. Morgan Householder wonders, how is the contract made on a statewide basis?
I'm not sure what he's referring to, honestly. The contract is not a statewide basis. The contract was specifically for the University of Vermont. So I'm not clear what the question is, but just to confirm, this was really a contract for the University of Vermont campus only.
Great.
There is the other contract is for the state schools, which does not include UVM.
Which is separate, right?
Gotcha. Okay, moving on. Someone wonders, what cost increase did students have to pay for their meal plans, if any?
So our meal plans on our campus typically average a roughly 3.5% increase on an annual basis. What's important to note is the university also has one of the lowest cost meal plans of our competitors. We have a very inexpensive meal plan for what we try to do with it. We do a lot with very little. So there was margin to increase. So for the first 2 years of the contract, we are doing a 4.5% increase to help pay for our some of our values and what our stated values are. And then after that, it will return back to the 3 to 3.5% increase on an annual basis.
Gotcha. Okay. Does anyone have suggestions for how local farms and food hubs can best approach Sodexo run accounts in their own area?
Yeah, I mean, I think sustainability is critical in terms of our commitment to local and regional foods, and usually students who have an interest should contact their local general manager or district manager in their region who are in their school system. And we also have, if it's within our region, we certainly have a lot of constituents in the local regional New England area that Annie Rowell, who's Vermont First Coordinator for Vermont, and we also have a representative in Maine as well. So, or Farm to Institution New England, for instance, even as we're all members of that. So.
And I would add to that. I didn't get to say this at the beginning, but having a food service consultant for us, having Claudia as part of our team, was a critical part in how to communicate with the vendors, helping us think through and how best to present our information. Because a lot of the times, what we wanted needed to be framed in a way that vendor partners could really hear. And she was a critical member of that process for us. And I certainly can't speak highly enough for Claudia and how she helped us achieve what we were looking to do. But food service consultants in general could help make that happen too, from my perspective.
Thank you, Dennis, very much. And I agree. You know, it is part of the role of the food service consultant is to kind of make the bridge between the university's needs and aspirations and the reality of, you know, the supply side of the market and what suppliers need to be able to do to be successful. And the other thing I would mention on that note is that it was always the intent. I mean, UVM as a client is a client that wants its vendor partners to be successful. So part of the underpinnings of all of this was to create a win-win for the university and for Sodexo, as it turned out, and not to try to, you know, put the supplier on such a financial knife edge that, you know, their success was in question. We wanted a strong, healthy partner for the university.
Thank you. Okay, 2 more questions. One is from Wendy Smith. They say, can you provide examples of asks and the evaluation matrix associated with those asks for this RFP?
I'm sorry, with asks, like ASKS?
Yeah, requests, asks. Does that question make sense?
It does. I'm not sure I have that level of information at my fingertips from a process that happened 1.5 years ago. Claudia, do you have any immediate thoughts that come to mind in that?
Not immediately.
I mean, the asks like bringing local partner or local restaurants onto our campus were definitely met. That was important to us. We did not want any nationally branded food operations on our campus, and we asked them to look at local vendors and bring them as part of their bid package, which all the vendor partners that bid on the contract did do that. So that's one that comes to mind for me. That was very very helpful and really nice, actually, and that's followed through on.
That was a big one. You know, it's really, I think, changed the perception of the dining program relative to, you know, how customers see it and the level of diversity that exists within the program. You know, one of the challenges always with students is you know, they have big expectations and they don't want to, they never want to feel like they're being held hostage, you know, by the dining program. So that introduction of that diversity, as well as the introduction of, you know, the level of local sourcing that's going on, has, I think, really had a positive impact on the students' perception of how well the program is working for them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Wendy clarified, they said the challenge is that it's hard to tie in the evaluation, and they're wondering if you can make your evaluation matrix available if such a thing exists.
That document does exist, but it's not a public document, so it's not, I do not believe it is something that I can share broadly. I would need to speak with our procurement office before something like that could be made available.
Sure. Okay. And another question came in. So we've got 2 left. One is from Tara Bliss. They say, does the dining program engage with UVM's academic offerings and programs, such as sustainability, agriculture courses, etc.? And also, are these initiatives driven by Sodexo or by faculty members at UVM?
We do have some pretty strong academic offerings, and that is, I would say it's driven by both, but we have some very engaged faculty who have taken a hold of this in a very meaningful way and are having class offerings and writing class syllabi that surround the partnership with delivering food to our campus. So I think, you know, from my perspective, I think the faculty were a critical piece in that, and part of that was including faculty in the RFP process who that got them excited in wanting to do these partnerships with us. That's where it started, and it's grown from there. And now other faculty here on campus have also engaged in wanting to do that. The other part of that too is the internship programs that our vendor partner provides to our campus, and the faculty connections they have made as a result of those internships have been an important part of that partnership.
Great. Okay. We're just going to take this last question and close it off, and then I'll pass it back to John for a final wrap up. So someone wonders if you could explain how the process has worked for the Intervale and for the local farmers you've been working with. Do you have an idea of how the relationship works for them, and if it benefits them in particular ways?
Well, I think you'd have to ask them personally, but I know that as part of our Vermont First strategy for the state, we have an advisory council and a leadership group, and part of the the farmers and distributors and key stakeholders across the state sit on that advisory council, and part of their needs and desires are based on data and how what kind of what do we need? How do we aggregate some of that data so farmers can make informed decisions about potentially ramping up for farm to institutions? So I know that has been a very positive development for those in the community to get that information, because I think that was part of it. Like, how is it to get into a Sodexo on such a large operation? The Intervale Food Hub we work very closely with. This was our first year this past year in terms of having them deliver to campus, and so that relationship is growing, and we work very closely with Bobby down there, and we've got a new relationship with Peasley's Potatoes that has come out of our aggregate Vermont First strategy in terms of focusing on local potatoes and really prioritizing certain crops where we'll really maximize our purchasing for things that are available. So we've gotten some great communication tools in place that have really helped push numbers, and I think we have a good feedback process with local farmers today, better than what we did prior.
Good to hear. Okay, thank you so much, Claudia, Dennis, and Melissa, for answering all those questions from our viewers, and thanks participants for asking those relevant questions. I'm going to pass it over to John for a final wrap up.
Hey, thanks everyone for this great feedback. These guys were fantastic. I also just want to circle back and remind folks that the Toolkit provides a ton of resources as well. Don't forget, it's on the farm2institution.org under tools, under guides, and you'll find a lot of other stuff in there. Also want to gratefully acknowledge FCSI, which is Food Service Consultant Society International. They were really helpful in helping set up the CEU units, etc. So everybody be well, have a great rest of this winter. Tie back to this recording anytime you need to, and wish everybody peace. Signing out.